Alternative voices to the critical issues that matter. This is The Rational here on Co-op Radio 102.7 FM, and I'm Chris Stevenson. On tonight's program, Gary Jarvis brings us a first of a series of showcases on local artists. He will be interviewing Michelle Durham, a local jazz singer. Also, Yasmin Azerpajou joins us with her monthly international news segment. But first, Chris Shaw, critic and author of The Five-Ring Circus, joins me on the phone to discuss the latest news on the Olympic Village bailout. Good evening.
Hello.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm well, and you?
Great, thanks. So earlier this month, the BC government approved a bill to allow the city of Vancouver to borrow nearly $500 million to complete the Olympic Village. Now, before we get into the details, why was the Olympic Village short nearly $500 million?
Well, the village was short nearly $500 million because the company that was chosen to build it had gone to a hedge fund at apparently fairly high interest rate. And apparently their capitalization was also not sufficient to carry the bulk of the project itself. So when they got into trouble, they basically, when their costs started to rise, the hedge fund got very nervous, and that's something called Fortress Credit. They got very nervous because the city had not allowed the company Millennium to use the land as collateral because the company wasn't actually going to own the land until after 2010. So everyone got nervous, and they stopped sending money. And the project was in danger of ceasing to go forward in terms of construction, and so that's when Millennium held a series of in-camera meetings and other people with the city and various financiers, and they basically convinced the city that the only way that it was going to survive is if they started pouring money into it from city coffers. So the city put up $100 million. To keep the project going until February. But even then they realized that the financing was still in trouble, so the new city government decided they had to go to the province for special powers to amend the Vancouver Charter so they could go out and borrow a huge whack of money, basically $500 million, to get the project finished.
Yeah, that's right. And as I understand it, there's no cap on the amount that can be borrowed to complete the construction.
No, there's apparently not. The number they said they need is $458 million, but it could be more, of course, and likely will be as things Olympic tend to go.
And overall, what do you think about this bill?
Well, I think it's very irresponsible. They're doing things that they always do at the Olympics. They're working to an artificial deadline. They've committed to having the village ready in time for the athletes to move in and basically start the preparation even before the athletes come. So they're supposed to have it delivered in November. But the problem with that artificial deadline is it bypasses democracy because if you for this kind of capital loan, they basically should be going to the city residents in a binding referendum and asking them if they want to spend the money. So they're balking at doing that because they say they don't have enough time to do that. And given the deadline that they have self-imposed with this project, that might be true, but it bypasses citizens who are getting increasingly jumpy about a very expensive to-date project.
Now, Premier Gordon Campbell said to the media earlier this month that changing the city's charter will actually protect taxpayers and keep workers working on the Olympic Village.
Well, the latter is true. I'm not sure how it protects taxpayers by having the city now assume essentially all the financial risk. And Gordon Campbell is of the view, of course, that others share, which I think is false, that somehow the city is going to reap a profit on this or at least break even because they'll be able to sell all the condos, which essentially they'll own, into the market after 2010. And I suppose it could be true that will happen. The market will go back and they'll sell them for a profit, and the city might make, again, at least break even or at least maybe even make a modest profit as they had hoped to do originally. Since no one knows what the markets are going to do, since no one really knows if the markets are going to turn anytime soon, and the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve don't know, I'm not sure how they can make that prediction.
Now, Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson has accused the previous city administration of mismanagement of the Olympic Village. What do you think about the current management?
Well, I think Mr. Robertson is being a bit disingenuous because although he wasn't in council when these events were occurring under the previous administration of Sam Sullivan, 4 of his division councillors were. And as far as we know, and we have yet to see the transcripts of the in-camera meetings, but as far as we know, they all voted for the same stuff. They certainly voted for the $100 million bailout. They certainly voted for the $190 million loan guarantee. So if the mishandling happened on the previous watch, then at least a large part of his caucus was involved in it. So trying to pin the tail on the NDP as purely responsible is simply not true.
And with the Olympic venue still going up all around the city, are there any other potential funding problems?
Well, there always are, because the construction costs have continued to rise. So the city still has paid a lot of money for the other venues. I don't know exactly how much, but it's certainly in the tens of millions of dollars. The city has not yet acknowledged how much it's going to spend in Olympic security, and that's totally separate from the federal and provincial contribution. The city is not acknowledging all of the other hidden Olympic costs, such as staff time, such as signage, such as all the extra time that different city employees will devote to the games. So what the city really doesn't want to come clean on is how much the final Olympic bill to Vancouverites alone is going to be. And of course, remember, Vancouverites are paying taxes not only here but provincially and federally as well. So Vancouver citizens had been promised by Larry Campbell when he was mayor that it wouldn't cost them a penny, and of course we've seen it's gone dramatically beyond that not one penny to billions if not trillions of pennies, and it's going to sooner or later show up in everyone's tax bill.
Are there any other residents in BC that are going to be on the hook for cost overruns?
Well, all of them actually, because the city is not the prime guarantor of delivering the Olympics. The city is responsible for delivering the village and providing the resources for the games to go on here. But the ultimate guarantor of all things Olympic is really the provincial government. So people who live in Haida Gwaii and Prince George and everywhere else are going to be paying for the cost that we now see have exceeded as of Friday in the Sun. And again, we predicted this. There's up in the $7 billion range, and if they're admitting $7 billion, it's almost certainly higher. So imagine you're in Prince George and your mill is closed because of the pine beetle thing, and Gordon Campbell has basically refused to do anything useful about it, and now you're going to be getting a larger tax bill because the province has basically over a barrel for the Olympic costs that have gone up by a factor of 10 over what they were promised back in 2002. So the government of BC basically misled the public, as did the city. They basically said the entire contribution at all levels of government was going to be about $600 million. And of course, if it's $7 billion, it's vastly more than that. And this is very typical for things Olympic. They always go much, much higher than the projections, and that's because the projections are deliberately lowballed so that people will support the project in the first place. If you'd gone to anybody in Vancouver, or even for that matter in the province, that it's going to cost $7 billion, how many people do you think would have voted yes in the plebiscite in Vancouver?
Probably a lot more than did.
Probably a lot less than did. Actually, there was a recent CBC poll where they actually asked that question, and something like 80% of those who voted yes said they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do it again.
Wow. And on a broader scope, you just mentioned it earlier, but how do the problems look in the 2010 Olympics compared to past Olympic issues?
Well, so far, Vancouver is tied with London for probably the most expensive games ever. For games that of this scale. Athens came in close to $20 billion. London is approaching that already, and they still have 5 years to go. And we are certainly the most expensive winter games on record. And I suspect if they're saying $7 billion is going to be a lot higher, and when our security costs come in, and when the other construction costs come in, I think we're going to see it's going to be the most expensive winter games ever. Now, we may be exceeded by Russia in 5 years' time, but meanwhile we will have achieved the gold medal for the most expensive winter games in Olympic history.